1792, the first one after the Constitution, said that if you participated in counterfeiting, that you could get the death penalty. And to them, counterfeiting was printing notes that were worthless.
Bills of credit. Because
they knew what it was like when the
Federal Reserve notes.
when the continental dollar went to zero, and they knew what runaway inflation was. And I'm sure Jefferson and others would say, "Look, don't you remember? What happened?" So if they instituted the death penalty for counterfeiting, he would say, in the moral sense, this is what we've done. We have legalized counterfeiting. You and I can't counterfeit. Fortunately, that's still against the law because it's fraud. But why is it that the government's allowed to do what we're not allowed to do? See, there's a basic principle in a free society is that governments can't do what you and we can't steal and rob and hurt people. Unfortunately, that's still generally understood that's a good rule. But we have failed to recognize that the founders understood that governments can't do that either. So if fraud and deceit and paper money is all bad and warmongering is bad, for the people, then governments should be held accountable. So I think they would be outraged. But I bet you they would understand, because they warned us against this. They warned us, and they did not like pure democracy. They wanted a republic, and they would say, well, you're not. Their first words would probably be, well, you become an obsessive democracy where the majority rules, and you're picking socialism. But it's the idea that majority rules and comes in and say, well, we want this and we want that, and as long as the majority opinion thinks they're getting something, and they would probably say, well, you have succumbed to the temptation of getting something for nothing. But you better watch out, because if you get something for nothing, you're going to lose it.
Yes. You were talking about the government printing money, but what most people don't know is that the government actually borrows money from a private bank that they've authorized to create the money for us, the Federal Reserve. Can you expand on that part, how it reflects on the Constitution, Congress allowing a private bank to create our money?
Yes, and that's tricky, and it's a tricky language as well, because it is a central bank, and Hamilton liked it from the very beginning and started a national bank, and then of course Jefferson got rid of it, and then soon there was another national bank, and Andrew Jackson got rid of it. But the Constitution does not authorize central banking, but the current central bank we have is the Federal Reserve System, and a lot of people refer this as a private bank. And in some ways, that isn't fully descriptive of what it is. It's private. It's private in the sense that private individuals benefit. The banking elite benefit, and they're the insiders, and they rule. And it's very secretive. As a member of Congress, I can find out more information about what the CIA is doing than what the FOMC is doing, the central bank, what they're doing on monetary policy. That's very, very secretive of what they're doing. But the Congress created it. So it's not like General Motors being a private company. In some ways, it's almost worse than just saying private. The benefits are privatized, and yet it's ultra secretive and all powerful. A person that runs the Federal Reserve, especially when you have somebody like Alan Greenspan, he is probably the most powerful man in the world. As long as the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, Federal Reserve Board chairman can make or break a president. They have more control over the economy. Ultimately, though, and this is where I find a sense of optimism, ultimately, though, the marketplace rules. And that's why I'm optimistic that this will all be sorted out. Take, for instance, in the 60s, we all knew that $35 an ounce wouldn't hold for gold because we knew they printed too much money. But the authorities, the central bank and the Treasury and everybody got behind supporting gold, the dollar at $35.
You're talking about the London gold pool now?
The gold pool and the pseudo gold standard of Bretton Woods.
Yeah.
And this is when I became a true believer, because I read Austrian economics and I said, it won't work, it won't work. And boy, August 15th, 1971, the Bretton Woods collapsed. And of course, gold took off. So the market ultimately rules, even though under today's circumstances, a Bernanke or a Greenspan, very, very powerful. And they might, I'm sure they are trying to manipulate the price of gold, and they're always trying to manipulate the value of dollars. And the people are deceived, and the world plays this game that the dollar is as good as gold, and it's a reserve currency. So we have this wonderful benefit in this country of printing gold. It used to be you had to earn the gold. And then if you spent it, you had real money. But now the world has been deceived. Instead of it totally collapsing in 1971, we inherited a system that allowed America to be the producers of gold, which is paper, and we have great commodity or consumer goods, but we lost all our industry because it was much easier to ship these jobs out and let somebody else do the hard work, because we have the unlimited supply of gold, which is our dollar. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a fantastic thing. But I'm convinced that the system we have today will no longer last than did.
We're abusing it too much.
And people will come around to rejecting the dollar, because we depend on countries like Japan and China to finance our current account deficits. So we get the money comes flowing back, and they loan it to us at cheap rates, and we finance our war and our welfare. I mean, if this system could continue to work indefinitely, it would mean that Americans would not have to work ever again. We would just loaf the rest of our lives and just print the money and buy whatever we needed. And one day, a long time before we all quit working, the world will wake up and find out that we in this country who have lived beyond our means unfairly will be living beneath our means. And even though the very wealthy who have benefited tremendously from this system, many of them will know the tricks of the trade, and they know what to come in, and they'll protect themselves. But there'll be many of those who don't quite understand this and think that this wealth is perpetual, and they'll be brought down as well. I'm in the business of protecting liberty as a congressman. So that's my goal. And I think of what's happened in third world countries, or in particular in Germany. Ultimately, when you have chaos, economic chaos brought about by monetary manipulation, runaway inflation, the threat is not to the loss of their personal wealth, which is a possibility. The real tragedy is the coming of a dictator. You know, whom are we going to blame? The Nazis blamed the Jews, and it has to be always a scapegoat. And then they go in and accept the dictator, and it takes a long time to iron that out, and too often that leads to war. And just back to the basics, the education, the understanding, the founders' message, the message we have in our Constitution. It could all be preventable, but we yield to the temptation of a free lunch. Is the problem.
Can you tell us a little bit about the entitlements?
Well, there are too many, because we should be entitled to our lives and entitled to our responsibility to take care of ourselves. That's what's in a free society. But entitlement is a very, very deceptive term. Most people think an entitlement is like a right. An entitlement, you're entitled to medical care, entitled to a job, or entitled to education. And those are misnomers because they have become rights and demands. So if you need something or demand something or want something, you're entitled to it. It becomes a right. And if you reject it, then you're antisocial and un-American. And yet we live with that. But there are two groups get entitlements. Most people, when we talk about entitlements, and I really bought into this before I first went to Congress, and it was always those poor people. You know, and they have been taught to be entitled to something. They've been misled, or they've been unfortunate, so therefore they're entitled to be taken care of by the people who produce. And I thought that was most of the entitlement welfare system. But I think the entitlements and the welfare for the rich is a much bigger deal. The monetary system we talk to is an entitlement that they think that they have this right to earn the money. At least they've devised it so that they can. But then there's the entitlements of privilege regulations and tax benefits here and there, and the military-industrial complex and contracts. Just think how many billions of dollars are going into big corporate coffers in trying to rebuild Iraq. First, the military-industrial complex makes all this money building weapons. And then when they destroy a country, then you get more money to rebuild it. And it just goes on and on. And who gets it? The rich don't